today's video, what I want to talk about is the reason why we suffer. This is the foundation to a lot of what I'm going to be teaching on this channel. It's kind of the main purpose of what I'm going to be teaching, is recognizing what it is that causes us to suffer, why life is difficult, and how to go about it, what to do, how to free yourself from that suffering. This isn't to say that doing this practice that I'm going to be teaching is going to make life easy, that it's going to take away all of your problems, that you're just going to live in bliss all of the time. But what it does do is it gives you a way of coming to peace with all of the struggle, all of the difficulty that you face in life. And by practicing this, you realize that much of the suffering that we experience is actually self-inflicted. That there are things happening outside of us that seem to be problems. And that our natural response, or shall I say our conditioned response to that suffering, to those problems, is to resist them, to fight against what it is that we're experiencing. And what you learn when you practice what I'm going to be teaching here in this channel is that the resistance to life itself is actually the cause of the pain. It's the cause of the suffering. That the problems don't contain any emotional quality to them. They are neutral. That life itself is inherently neutral. And what gives it either pain or pleasure is our reaction to it, our response. So to make this simple, to start off, what I want to say is that most people, myself included, I've done this too for the majority of my life and still until I started practicing this. Most people approach life from the position that what life is about is attainment. That your life is about going after what you want, seeking some kind of fulfillment in the external world. And that by seeking fulfillment, you're going to arrive at a place where you feel whole, you feel complete, where you've fulfilled all of your needs. That happiness is somehow an external thing that we attain through experience. That once I get the job, once I get the relationship, once I get the house, once I get the money, once I get, you can fill in the blank with this. It's going to be unique to each individual. We all have our own specific wants and desires. But the problem is still the same. The idea that once I get all of those things, then I'm going to feel fulfilled and I'm going to feel free. And that's really the essence of this. What you learn through practicing this meditation, this non-resistance, this deep acceptance of life, which is what meditation is really about. Is about learning to accept, to allow, to come into peace with what is happening. What you learn when you do that is that the seeking itself is actually what creates the problem. The seeking creates the suffering, not the situation itself. The way we go about life, the way we approach it, is we navigate through all of these experiences. And as we experience new things, we either accept our circumstances or we resist them. When we resist our circumstances, what we do is we create a preference, an attachment to some kind of external condition that we want to replace the condition that we're experiencing. So to use an example, let's say in your life experience, you have an experience of lack. You experience lack. Maybe lack of money, which is quite a common thing for a lot of people. And as a response to that experience of lack, the natural reaction, the natural response, or as I said, the conditioned response, is to create a preference where you have more money, right? So you're poor and you want more money because you believe that the problem has arisen from the lack of money. Seems like a natural conclusion to draw. Seems like it makes sense. The problem with this is that the money never truly fulfills you. If it did, then the game would be over. Everything would be finished once you got the money. Once you attain that money, then you'd never want anything else. And we all know that's not true. As soon as you attain the thing that you've been seeking, inevitably you move on to the next thing. I've got the money, now I want the relationship. I've got the relationship, now I want the car. I've got the car, now I want the house. And it's this endless search for fulfillment in the external world, trying to attain or obtain something or become something in order to fulfill some perceived sense of lack that you've created within inside yourself. And the lack is simply, to break it down, a resistance to a certain condition. So what happens is, as I said with the money example, you resist your circumstance, your financial circumstance, your circumstance in relation to money. You create resistance. You don't like that. And so you create a preference and you attach to the preference. And when you create resistance, you inevitably create attachment. You will attach what you're the opposite. You attach to the opposite of what you are resisting. So if you resist money or the lack of money, you attach to money. If you resist the lack of love, then you will attach to love. You'll always be seeking the thing which you feel you don't have. And it's this disharmonious state, this state of rejection, this state of inner conflict, this state of resistance to what is, which creates the disharmony. And in that creation of disharmony, you search outside of yourself for something that you feel will liberate you inside. So you're searching endlessly in the external world for a solution, a savior, essentially, to a problem that you've created inside of you. And this is where the problem really lies. The problem isn't in the world. It's not that you don't have enough money. It's not that you don't have enough love. It's not that you haven't got the car or the house or the physical possession. It's not that you don't have enough followers on your Instagram. It's that you have this internal state of disharmony, this internal state of resistance. When you experience life and you're unable to simply be present with the experience, to accept the experience for what it is, you create this friction inside of yourself, this disharmonious state, which is just resistance. It's just a state of resistance to what is. And when we experience that resistance, that discomfort, we falsely assume that the external world is the source of that discomfort. This is the entire problem with us as humans, the source of all of our issues. It all stems down to the fact that we have an inability to accept what is. And in the discomfort of that inability to accept what is, we create preference, we create attachment, we seek something. We blame the external condition as though that was the source of our discomfort. Now, I do want to make a point here because it is important to say there are experiences in life which are incredibly painful, that are very difficult, very challenging. I'm not invalidating any of that. You know, we all go through things that can be traumatic in life. So there is a certain amount of pain which comes from an experience. But what I'm suggesting with this channel, with these videos, is that most of the suffering comes from an inability to accept what has happened, right? This is where we get trauma. This is where we get PTSD, where we get these prolonged states of suffering, because life can be painful. Life can be turbulent. You know, we go through moments of joy and moments of sorrow, but the difference is that when we experience moments of joy, we allow those to be, we accept them. And oftentimes we go seeking for more of the same because we create an attachment. But when we experience moments of suffering, A lot of the time what happens is we resist the suffering that we experience, and then we go seeking for something to save us, or we avoid future experiences that that act as a reminder for the suffering that we've experienced in the past. So if anything pops up in your life that triggers you, it usually triggers you because it reminds you in some form of an experience you went through in the past. Let's say you had a relationship with somebody called Sarah. In the future, anytime you meet another Sarah, if your relationship ended badly, the name itself is enough to create the same triggered feelings within you. And this is simply an example of how we store these experiences inside of ourselves through resistance. Whenever you resist something inside of yourself, you never let it go. You never allow it to release, and you create this internal friction, this internal resistance that keeps those experiences buried inside of yourself. And so we spend our lives navigating through this thing we call life, constantly seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, because we have been raised with this aversion to suffering, this aversion to discomfort. We avoid discomfort and we seek out pleasure. And that seems like it makes sense that of course we would. Why would we want to go through suffering? Well, the truth about suffering is that suffering is where you grow. It's the only way that you can create growth is by going through this process of resistance, right? To use a really simple example of this, the gym, right? Resistance training, they call it. When you go to the gym, when you lift heavy weights, the reason why you're doing this is because putting your body under physical strain creates the conditions for growth. But this is the same process that can be applied to any aspect of your life. Anytime you improve at something, it's usually following a period of struggle, right? You have to go through these experiences of discomfort in order to build the inner resilience, the inner resistance to create change within yourself. But we want to avoid that. We want to turn away from that because it can feel incredibly painful, Every experience has a different quality to it. Some experiences are far more painful than others, but they all have that quality of either being pleasurable and being painful. But as I said in the beginning of the video, the point I'm trying to make is that the majority of the suffering that we experience isn't actually from the experience itself, but in the resisting of it. There's a difference between discomfort and suffering, right? In the moment, an experience can be uncomfortable. It can be painful, can be traumatic, right? But when we resist that experience, it creates further suffering. The suffering multiplies within that experience, and we create this disharmony inside of ourselves. And when we build this disharmony within, we create that internal friction. We carry that with us into the world, and we affect everything that we interact with. I mean, we all know people in life, and you may yourself have been guilty of this in the past, as I definitely have been. Maybe you had an experience, or you know somebody that's had an experience in the past that was traumatic, and it made them into a not so pleasant person. And as a way of dealing with that, the fact that they've had this experience, they inflict the same energy on other people and then default back to blaming the experience as though that was the cause for the reason why they were unpleasant. And essentially what we're doing is resisting the experience inside of ourselves, refusing to acknowledge it, refusing to accept that that's what happened. And then because that feeling, that energy that we're experiencing from the experience, that we're never allowed to leave the body, to leave our being, because that's still there and still painful, it has to go somewhere. So we end up inflicting that same suffering on other people, creating the same disharmony in life that we're carrying inside through this internal experience of resistance. And this is really what the problem is. You can break this down. You can break down much of life In fact, I would argue the majority of this experience that we're having that we call life is about learning that truth, learning that lesson. That as humans, with the ability to think and solve problems, the nature of our minds being incredibly complex, we have this ability to process information in ways that other forms of life don't seem to be capable of. This can be an incredible tool, but it also is the source of all of our pain, all of our problems. You know, you go into nature and let's say a deer is being chased by a wolf. So as soon as a deer notices that it's being chased, the deer will release all of the same stress chemicals, the same adrenaline, cortisol begins to course through its body so that it can enter that fight or flight state and escape. And as soon as the danger is no longer present, the animal goes straight back to acceptance of the moment. It goes back to the state of harmony with what is. It goes back to doing exactly what it normally does. It doesn't linger in that state for longer than is necessary. But as human beings, we have the ability to put ourselves in those experiences simply by thinking. And this is exactly why life is difficult for us. This is exactly why we suffer, because we have the ability to cause suffering by overthinking a situation, creating resistance to something. We craft our identities based on our life experiences. This is a big part of what I'm going to be teaching in this channel. This is why the channel is called Beyond the Self, because it is the self which causes most of our suffering. This self-identity, the self-concept, the ego, as you could call it. Every one of us, human beings, has an ego, right? And the ego is simply your identity created through a lifetime of experiences, right? Everything you interact with, every experience you've ever had, everything you've ever encountered in life has culminated in the formulation of your identity, right? All of those experiences coming together to create your sense of self. And this sense of self is assigned a name, a date of birth. You create these self-concepts about your preferences, your likes, your dislikes, all of that based on everything that you've experienced. And these identities have programming within them of self-preservation, right? Which makes sense because it's how you live longer as an individual, as a being. Is your ego is all about survival. It's about self-preservation and protecting itself. Now, the problem with this, aside from the fact that I've described already that it causes you suffering, is it makes you selfish. And this is really the essence of what this channel is going to be about. You know, we all have these ideas about what spirituality is. Everybody's got their own particular form of that, whether you believe in God, whether you believe in an afterlife, whether you believe in chakras or kundalini or energy, or, you know, any number of experiences that you might consider to be spiritual. Now, I'm not going to invalidate any of those. I think they're all completely personal to the individual. But what I'm teaching in this channel is a practical approach to what you can call spirituality. Although I choose not to, because I don't want to give false perceptions about what this is going to be about. You know, when you say spiritual, it's very easy to create these assumptions about what that means. But for the purposes of this video, let's say it's a spiritual path, which I'm going to be teaching here. And the whole purpose of this spiritual path is to recognize that the problem in your life, the reason why you suffer, the reason why life is so complicated, is because of the ego, because of the identity, because the sense of self, the self-concept that you've created through a lifetime of experiences has also created an extreme state of disharmony within yourself. When you become extremely focused on self-preservation, which is, as I said, the nature of ego, the nature of this identity is to keep itself alive, to self-preserve. And as I said, creates its sense of self based on all of the experiences it's had. Because that's its nature, identifying with ego inevitably leads down the path of becoming selfish, right? Some people are overtly selfish and self-centered and create pain and suffering in the world, create the same disharmony they experience inside themselves because they don't care, because they're so involved in self that they perhaps don't know any other way. But when you get into spirituality, it becomes even more complicated. I'll probably do entire videos on that subject in itself, but it's very easy when you're getting into spiritual subjects to believe that the things that you've experienced in life make you more spiritual than those that haven't experienced those things. Spirituality can very easily slip into the territory of becoming another badge that the ego can wear to define itself. And anytime the ego defines itself, anytime the ego becomes self-focused, it inevitably becomes selfish, right? It places its own needs, its own purpose, its own functions, its own existence above everything else. And this is what the path of spirituality should really be about. And when you get into the core teachings of all spiritual traditions around the world and all religious teachings, you find that underneath all of the differing perspectives on, which God is real, which afterlife is real, what the nature of the universe is, where it all came from, those kinds of things, what you really find is that at the very center of all of these different traditions is one simple truth, which is that it's not about you. And it's a very difficult thing for the ego to accept, considering we've been raised in a society that has been designed from the get-go to convince you that your life is about you, that it's about yourself, that it's about building yourself up, that it's about getting what you want and becoming who you want to be. And, there's nothing wrong with having experiences, and there's nothing wrong with physical possessions and navigating life that way. But when you become too involved in that process, the very process that causes you suffering in the first place, you become selfish. You become self-focused, self-oriented. Concepts like manifestation, which is another subject that I can do entire videos on. These things become ways in which spirituality can be used to steer somebody towards a self-centered perspective, that being spiritual is about manifesting your desires and creating your reality and all of these ideas. When you do that, not that there's anything wrong with that, but when you do that, you sideline the real essence of what spirituality is about. And what it's really about is kindness, compassion, love. Are you creating more harmony in the world, or are you creating more disharmony through the actions of service to yourself? And that's what it becomes about. It becomes very simple. It's about, are you acting in service to the whole or service to yourself? And this is why I want to teach this. This is why the channel has been named Beyond the Self, because that is what I'm going to be teaching people how to go beyond that self-concept, that illusion of self, the separate self, the ego, and to go from a place where you're resisting your life, trying to control your life, and thereby creating this internal friction, internal resistance, which always ends up transferring into the world. When you create disharmony inside and you don't allow that to release, you don't come into acceptance and peace, you create that disharmony inside, you inevitably bring that to life. You bring that into the world and you affect people, you affect circumstances with the state that you're experiencing. But when you recognize that that is happening, you start to see quite clearly what the solution is. And the solution is to do the opposite. It's to practice peace. It's to practice acceptance, harmony. It's to practice compassion and love, and to go from a place where what you're doing is self-oriented to a place where it's about service, right? Service to the whole rather than service to yourself. Because this is the problem, right? As I said in the beginning of this video, the real reason why we suffer, the real issue, is that we believe that life is the problem, that life is about going after what you want, seeking fulfillment in the external world. It's very self-oriented. And because our attention is so focused on the external world and seeking fulfillment, seeking self-identity, seeking attainment, becoming in the external, we rarely ever turn our attention inwards to what is happening inside. And when you do go down that path of turning your attention inward, what you find is that your whole life you've been conditioned to think that there's an external solution to an internal problem, that somewhere outside of myself is the savior or the liberation from the pain that I'm experiencing inside. Never realizing that it's the resistance inside to some circumstance in your life, which is creating that whole cyclical, never-ending cycle of seeking, right? Because the feeling is generated by the resistance to life itself, searching for some external condition can never truly fulfill you. Once you get the thing that you think you want, you'll inevitably just find some other thing that you think you want and never recognize that it's the seeking that creates the problem. And the seeking is simply stemming from resistance. It's stemming from this inability to accept. And that really is the problem with humans, with humanity as a whole, is the inability to simply sit and be. Why can we not just be present? Why can we not just allow things to be as they are in the moment and accept them for what they are? Why do we have this incessant need to fulfill something, to make things be a certain way? And it always stems from ego, right? The mind's belief that somewhere outside of itself, there is a solution to something that it's feeling inside. And the path towards solving this problem is a very simple one, although it's not a process by which you will do something and then the problem is over. It's a consistent practice. Just like going to the gym, to use an analogy, you have to keep going. You have to consistently train the body through resistance, through enduring that discomfort. You have to train yourself into a new state. You have to practice consistently. And this is where you gain the results. And the same can be said for this path that I'm going to be teaching in these videos. And that's a path of meditation, a path of non-resistance, as I call it, a path of acceptance. So you can learn to go from a state of reactivity where you create internal friction to the experience of life because your ego feels that it will be better off if it controls things. Going from that to a state of peace, state of acceptance, state of harmony. And it's not until you experience this for yourself, once you get a true, deep, personal experience of what it feels like to live in a state of harmony with life, where you no longer feel that reactivity, you no longer feel that suffering caused by fighting against the flow of life. Not until you experience that this will really mean anything. This is a lot of the problem with spiritual teachings, is that it's all just words, right? A lot of what I'm saying is just words until there is a true subjective experience of it. And there's a clear difference between knowledge and experience. They're worlds apart, right? Because when you have a true experience of peace, like not just peace as a condition you've created for yourself, but true, deep inner peace, then you won't truly understand what that means. And that's what I'm teaching here. That's what I'm going to be sharing in these videos, is a path towards that liberation from suffering, to come to a place where you're in harmony with life versus struggling against it. And everything becomes so much simpler. Everything becomes easy. Life doesn't become, it's not that there won't be problems, but your relationship to life, and this is really what spirituality is about at the core, is relationship, right? Your relationship to life will completely change so that life no longer becomes about struggle, no longer becomes about suffering, about fighting against the flow, fighting against what is. and trying to struggle to get somewhere. It goes from that uphill battle to a state of calm, peacefulness, and centeredness. And it's not until you experience that you really understand what this means. So this is what I'm going to be teaching in these videos. And on the subject of peace, this is really an important point to make. I think a lot of people misunderstand what peace really means. You know, when I say peace, when I say harmony, I'm not talking about some kind of condition that you create in your life. It's not about, you know, creating a comfort zone filled with all of the things that make you feel peaceful and retreating there. You know, that can be fine. I mean, you can have a house with all of the things that you like in it. That's absolutely fine. That's an experience. But if your sense of peace is dependent on those things, dependent on the fulfillment of some condition, then you're back to this whole search for fulfillment. You'll seek peace in external means. True peace is not about fulfilling some kind of criteria that your mind has created because it thinks it will make it feel safe. No, peace is, can I come to peace with life as it is? Can I accept the things in life that life is causing me to fight against? Can I do exactly the opposite of what I've been conditioned to do from the get-go, which is to try to control, try to struggle, try to make things be the way that I think they should be for myself to feel free? And once you do that, once you learn this, the whole path becomes clear. Everything becomes smooth. Everything becomes calm. You'll still have moments when you react. You'll still have moments of difficulty. Things won't always be easy, but your relationship to them will be. You'll have the necessary foundation of calm and clarity and ease to know what to do in any given moment. That when I resist, I create suffering. I create disharmony with myself, disharmony with the moment, and disharmony with life. And when I live that way, that's what I bring to the world. I create more of the same energy that I'm feeling inside. And this is why peace and harmony and compassion are really the most important thing. This is really the essence of spirituality, because if you can create that calm inside yourself, that peace inside of yourself, it's not so that you have an easier life. It's so that you bring that to life, that you don't end up creating more of the same energy that you're holding in yourself in the world. You don't create more disharmony in life. You don't create more suffering. You create more peace, more clarity, more ease. You create compassion. And it really becomes about recognizing that it isn't about you at all, right? This whole experience, it's not about your spiritual journey. It's not about you becoming some kind of enlightened being or spiritually liberated or becoming, mystical or anything like that. It's about recognizing that all of those things are paths of the ego, paths of the identity, trying to feel superior, trying to feel free, powerful, safe. And what it's really about is love, right? Really, what it's really about is kindness, compassion. It's about living in harmony with life itself, becoming part of this experience that we're in, that we're part of, bringing ourselves back into harmony with it versus creating more disharmony. So that's what I'm going to be teaching on this channel. And if what I've said in this video today resonates with you, if this sounds like something that you want to learn, then please consider liking and subscribing to this channel. I'll try and release as many videos as I can, as often as I can. And if you've made it this far in the video, I'm very grateful for you taking the time to hear me out. And I hope you have a great day. So peace and thanks for watching.